Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Today I'm bringing in one of my rare instruments and I'm going to start off with it. And I'm going to hold it up like this because I think this is the way you're going to be able to see it the best. It's a very, very small saxophone. It's called a curved soprano. It's very, very rare. You don't hardly see them anymore. They don't make them anymore. Let me hold it up now here. On the side to the right here so that you can see it better. This is so old. I can't tell you how old it is, but it's old and it's rare. And there's a story behind it, and the story is this. When my mother passed, she had wanted to buy me a smaller saxophone and a lightweight saxophone. The reason being is that I had open heart surgery. I didn't have quite as much ear as I used to have, although I recovered well from it. But she didn't have a chance to do it. She died. She had a major stroke and died at 91. So after her funeral, my sister and I were just going around stores, just kind of something to kill some time. We walked into a music store. This is probably 2 or 3 days after the funeral, and I was still there. And so we looked around the music store, and I don't know what did it, but I looked up toward the ceiling, and I saw this saxophone hanging from the ceiling. And I said, "Sister," which is what I often call her, "take a look at that." And I knew what it was because I'd wanted one for years, but never would be able to afford it. And I says, "This is a curved soprano. I haven't seen one in ages. They're very, very rare. That is something I would really like to have." And she looked at me and she said, "Buy it." And I said, "Okay." And I went up to the store clerk and told him I wanted to see this, and he brought it down. It was strapped up. It wasn't going to drop, but it was hanging up from the ceiling. And as I say, if I hadn't looked up, I never would have noticed it. And he brought it down, and I looked at it, and he said it's in good shape. They've been doing repair on it, and they wanted to really sell it. So I said, "Well, I'll buy it." I found out what the price was, excuse me, and it was very expensive. And he kind of looked at me like he doubted that I'd be able to afford it. And he said, "You realize how expensive this is?" And I says, "I know, you just told me. I want to buy it." "You're sure about that?" "Yes, I'm buying it." I don't know how many people have trouble buying things because people think they can't, but I've had several incidences of that. So here it is. It has a case, but the case is in such bad shape I won't use it. And instead I have a little duffel bag that I keep it in, and it's fully together and it plays. But these instruments, I have to tell you, are very hard to play. They're very hard to play because even though they're small, they require an enormous amount of air. Nonetheless, it plays everything that a regular saxophone can play. Once in a while, if you go to a concert or a dance band or something, you'll see a person playing an instrument like this, but now I don't think you can buy them anymore. So let me tell you, there are 2 or 3 differences between this instrument and a regular saxophone. One of them is that there are about 3 keys that are missing. They're not missing because something is wrong. It was built without them. Now, it doesn't change the fact it can play anything. It can play anything that any saxophone can play. So it doesn't hinder it at all. But the larger, bigger saxophones do have room for a few more keys than this little one has. I have 2 little keys on the side, and there are usually 3. And there's a little key that I usually have around this area that this instrument doesn't have. It doesn't mean you lose your notes at all. You just play them a little differently. And usually there's 2 keys here. There are, in my other saxophones, 3. Now, I don't know why. It may be that those keys were not invented at the time this one was made because it's very, very old. Every so often, there's kind of a process that goes on, and instruments get redesigned so they can add things or change things. They look the same, but the configuration of their keys are a little different. It may be that those keys that I'm missing on here, which aren't really missing because it wasn't made for it, but that are not here, that are on other saxophones. It may be that those keys weren't invented yet. Instruments do change with time and sometimes get more complicated with time. There is a possibility that those keys did exist, but that the instrument is just too small to put them on. Whichever, it plays everything that any instrument can play. I'll show the back side of it, which is a little plainer than the side with all the keys. Another difference that you'll notice is the fact that the keys don't have ivory coverings. Usually the keys, and I'll put my hand just on the first three, usually those keys have ivory or some kind of a white plastic that looks like ivory. This doesn't. This is all gold tone. And the rest of the instrument is silver tone. So you have a combination of a silver-toned instrument and a gold-toned instrument. I have not polished this. It would be brilliant if I did, but I don't spend any time polishing instruments because I like to see them as they are in the natural. This is extremely old, extremely expensive, and I do play it occasionally. It's hard to play, and everybody's amazed that a little instrument like this can play exactly like the big ones do. But it is just a miniature saxophone. I can't imagine who would have come up with the idea that we might need to have a saxophone this tiny. But it is cute, and I love it, and this is one of my prized possessions, so it is rare. I wanted to bring in another rare saxophone, and I just can't carry everything. It's a C melody tenor. It's quite large, but no one hardly has ever even seen one. But I lucked out, and somebody gave me one, and it was in bad shape. It was completely refurbished, and it's a very brilliant, beautiful instrument, and I'll try to have that in maybe 2 or 3 segments from that. Now, going on from here, I've been teaching you about scales. I've been teaching you how to hold an instrument. I'm going to go over that probably every time we come in. Remember, when you pick up a recorder, and it's a real instrument, it's not a toy, and believe it or not, some of the fingerings, most of the fingerings on the recorder are exactly the same as the fingerings for the saxophone. But you pick it up, and your left hand is always going to go on the top, and your right hand is always going to go on the bottom, and you have 3 fingers used on the front. The thumb, which is used, is on the thumb hole in back, covering it, or for some notes, just pull it down a little bit. It's called half-holing, where you have it's a little bit off, and what you get is an octave from that. That's equivalent to an octave mechanism on a different kind of instrument. Then you have your 4 fingers on your right hand, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the thumb doesn't do anything except balance the instrument. But what can go wrong? So I'm going to play a little. So what could go wrong? You know how you position your fingers. They're always positioned curved, and they're always up over the tone holes where they're supposed to be. And now, if you were taking piano lessons, and I studied piano for a few years before I switched to the woodwinds, your teacher would tell you, always have your hand ready to play, even if you're not using notes. Have them over the notes where you think you're going to be, so you don't have to switch your hand around quickly. If you have your instrument and you're only using these top 3 notes, but your hand is on your lap, 1, the balance of the instrument isn't right, so it's easier to drop drop it. The other is if you suddenly have a note, you've got to switch and move your hand quickly to get to it. So you never do that. You always have your hands exactly over the holes, and if you're not using those notes, you keep your hands close by. So I can go from a G, and this hand is free, and go to an F sharp. Just press that finger down. But if my hand was in a different position, it would be hard to get to it in time. So I'm going to tell you what mistakes that you may make. Since you're not sitting with a teacher or you're not sitting with me, if I'm teaching a private lesson, my student is beside me and I watch what they do and I do it and they copy me. And if they start doing something wrong, I can say, no, you don't do it that way, you do it this way instead. And I can catch a lot of mistakes. If you're trying to do it on your own, you really need to watch carefully to make sure you're doing it right. And if you have any questions, you should either email me and ask me or go to somebody who knows how to play and check with them to see that you're doing it right, because they'll know. So what I want to do is cover what your mistakes may be before you get so set in them that it's hard to undo it. You know, it's a lot easier to play it right to begin with than it is to unlearn something and then learn it right afterwards. And that's a problem. If you have to break a habit because you're doing it wrong and then try to learn it right, it's more difficult to do. So if you look at the hand position, one of the things that people do that are a mistake is they start to flatten their hands. And you can't play the notes well if you flatten the hands. For one thing, your hands are stiffer, you can't get them in the right position easily, and it's hard to close the tone holes. If you don't close the tone holes, you're likely to get a squeal. Let me just show you. This is the right way. Wrong. You see, I wasn't secure, and therefore I was getting a little squiggly, squealy notes because I couldn't get the tone holes covered right. Make sure that your hands are not flattened. Make sure that your fingers are curved and over the tone holes so that you can close them completely. Now, sometimes we do open part of a tone hole because we want to do some half holing, because we want a sharp or a flat or something like that. But for the most part, playing regular notes, your tone holes must be completely covered, and if they aren't, then you're going to get squealy notes. You can, in terms of the mouthpiece, a lot of people will try to squeeze their mouth too tight, and what they're going to do is squeal again. When you put the mouthpiece in your mouth, and it is critical, you make sure that your teeth, you put it in about a third to half of the way, usually probably a third. Your teeth are on the top, and of course your lip comes over that, and then your bottom lip is over your bottom teeth, and then you squeeze the sides of your mouth. What happens if you squeeze too tight? Your teeth aren't on the top, your lip isn't on the bottom or covering the bottom teeth. Here again, you're likely to get tones that you don't want, and they're not clear, and they don't sound good. So that's critical. And it's also critical that you tongue, ta, ta, when you have it in your mouth, your tongue will hit the top part of this mouthpiece, and then you draw it away, ta, 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 to, whatever you are pronouncing. Now, if I'm teaching students, I will actually give them tonguing exercises where they have to tongue every note. But if you can imagine playing a song like that, because I made this up, but playing a song like that, and you're not tonguing, it's passable, but it's not crisp and it's not clear. And in most songs that you have, you're going to have to do at least some tonguing, not complete, and you have to know when to slur and you have to know when to tongue. So when I'm teaching a person, I'm very, very careful about how I teach them. When you slur something, you will tongue the first note and then not tongue for however long the slur lasts. And you will know that because in your music it will be marked. There will be no sign, no slur over a note, and then there'll be a line, and it's just a little curved line, and over what you're supposed to slur. Now in that, because I was just making that up, but you just slur some and you tongue some, and there are exercises that teach you how to do that, and if you're close to a teacher, they will make sure you're doing it right. Tongue this and don't tongue these 4 notes. Whoops. So some notes you tongue and some notes you slur. It's just important that you get it right. And I'm just fooling around here, but I want to show that to you. The other thing is you don't puff out your cheeks when you have the instrument in your mouth. You don't do this. You keep your cheeks flat. You squeeze when you squeeze your lips around the mouthpiece, you keep them flat. You keep your mouth flat. I've noticed a lot of brass players, especially people who are just learning how to play brass, they have the mouthpiece to their mouth and they're playing in it, and I wished I brought a brass mouthpiece with me, but I didn't. And then they puff their cheeks out. And that's always the wrong thing to do. Keep your cheeks flat. So, that gets the right tone. Another thing that students do all the time is they make separations between their sounds, and they shouldn't do that. Like, for example, so if you're going to play fast, how do you do it? Not good. You need to play smoothly, so one note goes right into the next note. When I say right into, you get to the point, you play a note, you hold it so that it's right up to the time that you play the next note. So there's not a big division between notes. So let me show you that. Now, each note was tongued, but one note went right up to the time that the next note was tongued, and that's good because you don't. At that point, you're not making separations. So what makes music sound good? It's when you get all of these little things, which some people don't pay attention to, but they sound like they don't pay attention to it as well. These little things that may seem minute to some people, but that's what makes a musician a musician. This is what makes music sound good. When you get the finer elements and it all blends together, you can play beautiful music on a recorder. You can play just wonderful music on a recorder. And I've been to concerts where I played a recorder and I've played in a higher register and it sounds just like a flute. And people have come to me and said, I just love the way that you play the flute. And I was playing a recorder. There is a difference, you know. But the recorder can play beautiful music, and it can play in some very high pitches as well. And so it's just important to remember you have to get the little finer elements down. And I can remember seeing one of my flute students when I was teaching at a fine arts center, and she came in and she separated all of her notes. She was playing flute. She was tonguing it, but she was separating all of her notes. And what happened was she didn't sound good. She also played piano, and her piano sounded good. And she got discouraged because I kept correcting her and correcting her. No, don't make that separation. This is the way you do it. That's the value of having somebody show you where you could make mistakes. And then finally she played a song, and it was beautiful. And her mother was sitting in the next room, because I always invited the parents to come. And she said, I could not tell the difference as to who was playing what flute. It all sounded so beautiful. So she made a remarkable transformation and became a very good flute player. But to do that, she had to get those finer elements in line. So I'm going to continue with this next time, because this is important. And then I'm going to show you some extra fingerings for the instruments. So we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.